Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
I've known Ben Jailer a while now. We first spoke when I ran Eat Sleep Fish and published his first fishing article. Since then, he has gone on to write for Fly Culture and other publications too. He has appeared on the podcast previously when I fished his secret lake, and stalked rainbow trout in crystal clear water with him. I'm catching up with him to see how the fishing has been and to learn some more about his book, Fish Camp Fail. Ben, it's great to have you back on the Fly Culture podcast. How you doing, buddy?
I'm all right, mate. I had an espresso first thing. I've just necked a red ambulance, so I'm off my tits on sugar and caffeine, so I think it's going to be a good one.
Fantastic. I'll try my utmost to stop you bouncing around the room as we go around. But I guess, I've sort of self-imposed. It's not taken a lot to do, but with the temperature and water levels and everything else, I've not fished for quite some time now. This is being recorded on the 17th of July. It just hasn't felt right to go fish the rivers right now, particularly in my part of the world, certainly. I'm hoping there's some rain coming on Tuesday after we have this few watt scorcher 40 degrees day. Are you similar in the sense of, I know you're mainly reservoir and highland lakes and stuff like that. Have you been able to get fishing before this weather sort of has come into play?
I think in terms of climate change, Pete, over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, particularly with the lowland reservoirs, I really see there's almost like a mid-season break now. So probably early June, probably until September, the water gets so warm, the weed comes up, the fish go down on the bottom, and everything just dies a death. Traditionally at the barrows, a lot of weed comes up there as well. So it's practically unfishable unless you can get a line over the top of the weed. Hooking a fish is one thing, but pulling it through that weed is another. Even Mystery Gentleman's Fishing Syndicate Lake X, which, by the way, I hate acronyms. So when I wrote that story, I just came up with the crappiest acronym you could ever imagine. But unfortunately, I'm stuck with it now. So I've always got to try. Is it MGSFLX? Yeah. So that's it. So I'm stuck with it. So basically, even Mystery Gentleman's Fishing Syndicate Lake X, I got it right. It's a natural spring-fed reservoir, really, really deep water. And I think even there, it hits June, the water feels like soup and the fish kind of sulk off. And also worrying where I live, loads of natural springs, loads of streams, everything is bone dry. Normally at MGSFLX, there's overflow pipes constantly running. Particularly in the winter, it's wonderful because you've got this cold water going through the reservoir. And my God, the rainbow trout, it's like fishing for steelhead. It's just brilliant. But I think probably for the last 12 to 14 months, there's been no water running through the reservoir. So it's a worrying picture. So even for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I've considered, June probably to September as being close season on the low, the lowland reservoirs. But it keeps on accelerating. So, this weekend, we talked about this weekend, we're meant to be hitting 39 degrees tomorrow, which is just absolutely, it's beyond belief to be talking about in that terms. So the conditions we've been suffering has not even taken into account those kind of extremes. So Christ knows what's going to happen, over the next few years. But put my selfish hat on and just going back to fishing, what I've increasingly been doing is trying to get up into the mountains, into the Welsh Hills, the Cambrian Mountains, and fish sort of upland reservoirs. And typically, talking to geniuses like George Barron and Sari Thomas, I'm always on the phone to them to find out when it's warmed up there, because the fishing there doesn't tend to switch on probably until the end of May. So in terms of my fishing windows, as the lowland reservoirs get too hot, the upland reservoirs are at just the right temperature. So then I can sort of switch my fishing to there and then come back to the lowland reservoirs in September. But to be honest, September was always a fantastic time to be fishing the likes of the Barrows, Chew and Blackton, because you get that, the temperature goes cold, the fish turn onto the fry. But even in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been no there's been no back end because we don't seem to be getting seasons anymore. There's not that first frost, which is the trigger to turn the trout onto the fry, which led to just such exciting fishing. So I don't want to be kind of all doom and gloom stick to the fishing, but it's very concerning.
Yeah, you've got to be thinking about obviously the welfare of the fish, and I'm sure anybody listening is likewise as well. Are you one of those? And I know Perry and I were out getting our asses kicked by mullet, and that seems a particularly big growth area, thanks to the likes of Colin McLeod and Paul Jennings and others. Is that something that's coming onto your radar, that you're looking for a fishing fix of some form elsewhere as well, away from those warm water temperatures that are too warm for trout?
Interestingly, Pete, that's a topic I cover in my new book available from Amazon called Fish Can Fail. And I think I went through that process maybe a couple of years ago where I'd probably been fishing kind of lowland reservoirs, God, for about 10, 12 years. And I was a bit bored. You know, all rainbow trout, they just all started looking the same. And you're kind of aware that, that they're not natural, they're bred in tanks. I think I referred to them as being as unnatural and sexless as Donald Trump's marriage. And I think it was at that coincided with a trip to Brittany, and I really fancied doing some fishing for bass. Um, and of course, you kind of look to guiding because I was completely new to it. But guiding's expensive, man, and I'm a tight ass. So I think in terms of a midlife crisis, I think I compared it to, the Ferrari and a sexual partner, 30 years your junior, compared to a 3am pickup. So I went for the 3am pickup, which was I bunged, €90 to a crazy guy called Manu, and we went fishing off Brittany's equivalent to Land's End for sea bass. But of course, what he hadn't told me, and me in my kind of la la land, not thinking things through, I'm meeting at 6am at the top of a 200-foot cliff, and I get vertigo bad. I don't know if it's an age thing and an area thing, but it's something that's really come on strong in the last 10 years. And it was great fun. We did find some bass, but we were fishing with spinners as opposed to the fly. And yeah, that definitely kind of rocked my world. That really sort of opened up some avenues. I know I'm quite close to the Bristol Channel, and I know there's a lot of guys sort of fish down there. As you move, further down south and you get away from the channel and actually into the what I'd call the ocean proper. So yeah, it's definitely something I want to explore. And I think as well as the kind of sea fishing aspect, that period I went through maybe sort of 2.5, 3 years ago is also what led me to seek isolation and head for the hills, so to speak, and pursue wild trout in their natural surroundings.
That's interesting, and particularly what you said about rainbow trout as well, given, I've fished your secret lake, and those are probably some of the finest rainbow trout I've ever fished for, and I stocked rainbow trout, certainly, that I've ever fished for. Is that an exception to that rule for you, or is that a broad brush that you've used for that, or is that a little exception?
I think it's like anything. If you do one thing to excess, you grow tired of it. Even if you really love it. And I think I'd fished lowland reservoirs. I'd had one season where I was fishing small streams south of Bath. I think it was the Avon and tributaries waters. And I think it's they say a change is as good as a rest. And what I found is pursuing wild trout. Tiny wild trout. Sometimes you're catching things 4 inches long, absolutely beautiful, and taking them in a sort of natural environment. But then what I'd do is I'd go back to Chew Valley, sort of fish off the North Shore. And my God, after fishing in that sort of scaled down way, where a fish of 2 pounds is a fish of a lifetime, it was brutal, man. Just having 4 or 5 pound rainbows, smashing your buzzers, smashing your nymphs, ripping the droppers off. Again, because I'd sort of stepped away from that, tried something different and gone back. Man, it was such a thrill. And I think the same with, Mystery Gentleman's Lake. the trout, it's such an unusual place to fish. I think when we fished it, I sold it to you as being like fishing for bonefish or something like that, where it's sight fishing in crystal clear water. Um, there's very little invertebrate life in the lake. So I think the fish that are getting bigger are feasting on the crayfish lurking on the bottom. And my God, anything over 3 pounds down there will take you screaming to the back end. It's just, and it's a lightly fished lake as well. But saying that, because I can't remember. I think I might take one or two rainbow trout a season, just for the pot. And I think because we predominantly fish, catch, and release there, they smarten up as well. So maybe I'll have a fly this or a method that's successful for a couple of weeks, and then bang, they wise up. You won't get them on that again. So you constantly have to change your game, change your approach, and I think so. I think the lesson from that is just for me not to get stuck in a rut and just pursue one thing, pursue many things, and it keeps it fresh and exciting.
And the interesting thing for me is that you said, these small little trout that you're catching in these high up lakes, comparable to more sizable fish. Does that also mean that change of environment? So it becomes a bigger or a different thing to the actual fish. It becomes about the bigger picture, the environment that you're in, the walking, the camping, those sorts of things. Because I think about Chew, and that's still a pretty place to go fish, but you sort of arrive there, you park in the car park. Whereas I'm thinking of those lakes that you describe that, and I've not fished them, but I'm suspecting that you park and then it's quite some walk to get up there, and that's part of it. So, do you think that it is more than just the fish, if that makes sense, and to some degrees the fishing, that you're going for a bigger, wider experience of it all, and that becomes part of it?
Dude, absolutely. I think even before I made the move to the hills, the distinction I made, I predominantly fished the Barrow tanks over Chew and Blagden. Chew, in terms of actual fishable bank, it's very limited how much of the lake you can cover from the bank. So what I find is I might arrive on North Shore, fish there for a couple of hours, and then kind of do a circuit of the lake around all the banks. But you fish for an hour, jump in your car with your waders, break your rod down, drive somewhere else. But what I liked about the Barrows, there's three reservoirs there. Even within that confined space, they're all very different, have different characteristics and different tactics to be successful there. And it's the distance as well. So if one's not working well, I can just walk to the next one. If that's not working well, I can walk to the next one, work my way around the hotspots. And I think I've always been a kind of roaming angler. I like that approach of covering ground, covering a lot of water, because I don't believe the fish come to you. So I have my kind of confidence flies that I know work. So if I've got a confidence fly and I'm not catching, I assume it's because the fish aren't there or they're not feeding that particular time. So I'll keep moving until I find fish. And I think the key for me is, if I'm trying a new spot, I'll have a hookup or I'll catch a fish within 5 casts. I won't have a hookup or catch a fish on the 50th cast. So I'll fish an area for 10, 15 minutes, nothing happening. I'll move on, keep moving. So I think it was twofold with my decision to head for the hills. I just had a big birthday, so I wanted to. I never really sort of gone away and had a fishing holiday before, so I just wanted to get away, go somewhere isolated, just put a backpack on. I think this is magazines like Fly Culture, Pete, um, and others just sort of, and I think particularly the American Max, the idea of getting up into the wilderness. It's such a kind of attractive thing. So I was looking for a holiday destination, somewhere like Iceland. I mean, that was way out my budget. You're talking thousands and thousands of pounds. And then I remembered reading an article about Jura, and particularly its connection with George Orwell. There's Barnhill Cottage, which is where he wrote 1984. And it was talking about him. He kind of lived there, I think, for a year or something, or a couple of years. It was shortly before his death, actually, before he wrote 1984, and him just diddling up into the hills, catching a couple of trout for the pot, and going back to the farmhouse, which just sounded delightful. And I kind of looked into it, cost wise, God, I sound like such a tight ass, don't I? I'm just going on about money all the time. But cost wise, it was affordable for me. So I just did it. Drove up to Moffat, stayed overnight, then drove to, I think it's Craig House or somewhere, and got the ferry across to Jura. And man, it was just a revelation. It was so isolated. There's 200 people on the island, but where I was actually staying was the north end of the island, where there's maybe a couple of small settlements, 20 odd people, and it was like a fairy tale, or people talk about things being like screenplays. It was just mental. I got up there. All I'd done was look at an Ordnance Survey map. Unusually, in this world of the internet, social media, you can research where you're fishing and find out lots about it. I couldn't find a lot online about Jura, so I just got an Ordnance Survey map and just kind of marked up a few locks and things like that. But basically, there's Jura Stores, which is the one kind of village shop on there, and I just like rocked up there and just like said to the guys as I was coming in, over in the hills, I just saw this waterfall dropping down from a mountain, and I thought, I bet there's a lock beyond that. So I just rocked up at Jura Stores and said to this guy, I'm here to do some fishing. I saw that waterfall on the way down. Do you know if there's a lock down there? And he goes, oh yeah, sorry mate, I don't know anything about fishing, but there's a fishing contest tomorrow. And there's a note up on the board. And I said, I've just arrived. I'm a tourist. Would it be okay for me to go? And they said, yeah, they're fine. So so I went and looked at this notice, and it was the annual Barnhouse fishing competition. So once a year, a guy called Rob Fletcher, his family own Barnhill Cottage, and they have a fishing contest up in the sort of hills, surrounding the farmhouse in the part of the estate they own. So I just like rock up there at 10 o'clock, and they absolutely welcomed me. So so I went fishing. Um, we had this competition, and then I think when I decided to go on a holiday, the idea of actually, I thought the closest I'd get to Orwell's cottage was looking at it from a distance, from 3 or 4 miles away, and then we fish the contest. We go back on the Argo Cats, and then Rob's like, right, come everyone back to Barnhill. So within less than 24 hours of arriving on the island, I'm I'm drinking Kilkerman whiskey in the cottage with George Orwell, 1984. It was, what I mean? You just you just could not make it up, dude. And of course, for me as a writer, I just go home and type it up and sold an article to Trout and Salmon. It was insane, but yeah, that for me was the demarcation point, to be able to drive to the foot of some mountains, put your backpack on, hike up. Again, in terms of tackle, completely lightening down from a reservoir setup. I think typically I fish with a 5 weight. I used to use a floater, predominantly wet flies, I think. But I've recently I've become a pupil of George Barron's method, which is using a slow sink intermediate and sort of stripping the flies back through the surface, which is just flipping deadly. But yeah, from that trip to Jura, blimey, I was bitten. So as soon as I got home, the Cambrian Mountains are an hour and a half away. You read kind of Gearax books about how he jumps in his pickup and drives 6 hours to Wyoming or something. We can do this in this country, rather than thinking, oh, I wished I lived in America. Just think of Britain is the size of an American state, and you think of from Land's End to John O'Groats, the depth and variety of fishing we've got on our doorstep. So that's my kind of philosophy. Obviously, taking into account petrol prices, and impact on the environment to try and minimise my journeys. But you've got all this water to explore. So I just became a disciple of the Cambrian Mountains. Exactly the same principle. Drive up there to somewhere remote, have a fish come back. And I think wanting to extend that experience naturally lent to me wanting to camp out overnight. So instead of just bombing up there and back in a day, I could do 2 days and make a day of it. But inevitably, I'm kind of really good at planning and thinking about things up to a point, but then I don't go beyond that point. So, uh, John Ogborn, I think he was the one who first mentioned a bivy bag. So, so I watched all the YouTube videos. I did all my research. I looked at all the shops. I bought the bivy bag. I got the sleeping bag. I've got all the flipping gear. Um, but of course, the actual experience of wild camping overnight in Wales, you've got the logistics, the climate for a start. The first time I went there, my first attempt, it pissed down with rain before I even got into the bivvy bag. So I spent the night trying to sleep in a car. Second time I went with Steve Murgatroyd up to the TV pools, I did actually get into my bivvy bag, and then it started raining a bit, and then it got heavier and heavier and heavier. So I was in there for about, I'm not saying I was timing exactly, but it was an hour and 37 minutes, and it was that shit or get off the pot moment because um, the rain was so heavy I couldn't sleep there. And a bivvy bag, it's like one of those cafe awnings, like all those Tom and Jerry cartoons where the awning fills with water and then the water pours off the. It was like that. So the water had gathered in the hood, and I just moved slightly, and it all poured on my face. And I'm like, I've got to make a run for the car, but I'm down at my t-shirt and pants, and my wellies are outside the bivvy bag. And I was thinking, God, if I run the car, I'm going to get as equally as soaked as if I stay. And it did cross my mind to kind of wriggle in my red bivvy bag, to the car. But I'd look like some giant red maggot. I didn't want to scare Steve Murgatroyd into thinking he'd stumbled into a Welsh reboot of Tremors. So in the end, I just leapt out of the bivvy bag and headed for the car. And also the big thing is in terms of my lack of planning, solo while camping, I have a pathological fear of the dark, man. The only camping I'd done was when I was about 14 years old, and me and my mate Graham Howe, we decided to camp out in our tent in my parents' back garden. We lasted 40 minutes before we shat ourselves and ran back to so I've watched all the videos, I've bought all the gear, I've planned it, I'm in my bivvy bag, and then it's something like, fuck, this is really, really scary. So so it was also about getting up the hills, getting away, and conquering my pathological fear of the dark. And basically, this all formed the backbone of Fish Camp Fail because I was writing and publishing articles, while this process happened. But most magazines have a strict word count, maybe about sort of 2,000, words per article. Pete, bless you, you're very self-indulgent with my nonsense. You might let me get away with 3,000, 3,500 words, bless you, which is good. But I'd written a load of kind of much longer form stuff, 5,000-6,000 word articles, which were too long for any magazines. And it really sort of, the kind of narrative thread did deal with my adventures of trying to wild camp up in Wales while dealing with a pathological fear of the dark, which was caused by a childhood incident involving a werewolf. So I had the bulk of a book there, and then it was just a matter of kind of putting it all together. But
now I need to
I've got no
interject
life
for
plan, dude.
I need to interject for a second because you mentioned pathological fear of werewolves. I just need to get this straight: that werewolves don't exist, do they?
Yeah, they're real, Pete. Yeah, they
Oh
do.
my god!
They do exist. No, they're just so through the book I kind of go for a process, and I do finally manage to spend a night by myself in the mountains, wild camping solo. So with some help from some very special people, and putting in a mental overseas call to New England Patriots boss Bill Belichick, who's the most no nonsense, don't be a dick kind of guy you've ever met in your life. He makes Alex Ferguson, look like Philip Schofield.
Yeah.
This guy, he's 110% no freaking bullshit, win at all costs. So basically, when it got rough on that night, I put in my mental overseas call to him, and he talked me through it. And the conclusion was, I'm the only person on this mountain within 10 miles. Anything else is a product of growing up in the 70s. So, man up, go to sleep. And yeah, I woke up to foxgloves, blue skies, and yeah, it's all good. Perfect solitude.
So was it for you when you were camping? I'm also reminded when you mentioned bivvy bags, my friend Duncan, that a group of us fished up on Dartmoor and stayed overnight, and he stayed in a bivvy bag. And I remember seeing him the next morning. There had been a bit of whiskey drunk, and all I could see was a pair of smiling teeth from under the bivvy bag when we got up in the morning. But was it the sort of things that go bump in the night that would feed your imagination just a little bit too much?
Well, this is it. I think I've grown up and lived in. I say grown up, but I've lived in cities, where a healthy level of paranoia is a kind of good thing. Um, but basically, my obsession with horror films and I guess true crime as well, mixed with a healthy dose of paranoia, it's kind of quite a combustible mix. So I just find when I'm in those situations, my imagination is just running wild with me, because I think there was a progression. So I started off with the bivy bag. Again, I was a complete idiot because, a bivy bag has a time and place. So say this kind of weather we're experiencing at the moment, yeah, that's bivy bagging weather. Um, May on the Cambrian Mountains, which has the highest rainfall in the UK, that's not bivy bagging. You need a proper tent for that. So I did the bivy bag bit, then I graduated to a proper like one man tent. In between that, I spent the night in a bothy, which was quite cool. I met some very interesting characters there. I might, if I get the chance to read an extract from the book later, I'll read a bit which covers that night in the bothy. That was good fun. Yeah, so I went to the 2 man tent, and then I think by the end of that summer, I was staying in a converted goods wagon on this kind of hippie commune in this valley in the absolute arse end of Wales. With no electricity, no running water. It was just bliss. That kind of thing of getting away. Yeah, it's really really good.
Nice. I'm thinking about the bothy, and that probably would set my alarm bells ringing more than anything else, and the potential for axe-wielding homicidal maniacs sharing the accommodation with you. Did that not feed? I'd have thought that would have pushed you right over the edge.
I think it's there's things even more scarier than axe wielding murderers or things like that. I could have been stuck in there with a Tottenham fan. I could have been stuck in there with a bunch of kind of over 60s happy clappy hikers, because that's the thing. Because I'm going to the mountains to get. I do it in the book a bit because obviously it was during the pandemic, and the problem we had with the pandemic, all my happy places, the isolated places I used to seek out, had now been taken over by the freaking COVIDiots. So for me, I go to these places to be isolated and get away from people. So the idea where I'm going to go and stay in a bothy and have to have awkward conversations with people I've got no bloody interest in, that's almost as scary for me as werewolves. So I kind of like approached this bothy. Is it, who's there? Is it? I just saw these two guys out the front. I thought, oh yeah, that looks okay. And we kind of went from there. But it was that whole kind of socially awkward thing, but just trying to find enough in common with each other to get us through until uh, bedtime, and then I could head off. But of course, having suffered through bivy bags, this bothy was amazing. It's better than some of the farmhouses I've rented, for family holidays. And I thought, I want to conquer this. I want to spend a night in the wild in a tent or in a bivy bag. But equally, why the hell am I bothering when I could be staying in a bothy? It was just incredible. Yeah, really really good.
Nice, nice. And you've mentioned him on here, and I think a shout out should go out to Kerry Thomas as well about his book that has given plenty of information on where you could go, what you could do, where you can fish. Have you found that's been useful for you too?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to pick up a copy. But what if I think I'll sort of touch upon this as a book as well. Um, the people you meet in the hills, they're great. So I think on my first couple of trips, I hooked up with Steve Murgatroyd, who's a writer for fly culture and an all-round nice guy, the best dressed fly fisherman I've ever been out with. I mean, fuck man, it's like fishing with Sherlock Holmes. I'm Captain Primark. I've got bloody Savile Row next to me. Really good fun. And we're just fishing TV pools, and we're kind of like going, seems like going, oh, I think that's George Barron over there. George Barron, he's this legendary, uh, sort of Welsh fly fisherman. Fished at every level you can internationally, done it all. And of course, we just went up to and had a chat with him, and he was great. He put us on some fish. He gave me some flies. Lovely lady, he was with him as well, called Gail. And it's just weird because there's so many lakes to fish in that area, but you always find you bumping into people, and they're so free. They're so free with the advice. Even before I come up, I might drop someone an email and just sort of say, how's it all fishing? Um, and it's that brotherhood of the angle. Fly fishing seems to be a relatively kind of arsehole hole free zone. Um, Funny enough, Pete, in one of my stories in Fish Can Fail, this is a subject I touch upon, because basically, I've got a bit of confession to make. I don't particularly like dogs. I know you've got a dog, and it's a lovely dog, but I'm a cat person. I can't stand that slobbering attention. And so somehow when I was in Jura, I found myself actually sharing a boat with a fishing mad dog called Ginny. Um, and then I met her owner, who was the head stalker of the Ardlusa estate. And as you do, it was coming up to my last day. I said, "Oh, anywhere to fish?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, there's a really remote loch which I've been stocking, and it's full of Jurassic brown trout." And so 12 hours later, I find myself in an Argo Cat, you know, driving 50 minutes up into the hills, into a remote loch, into a remote part of a remote island, 650 miles from home, no mobile signal. I could just disappear like that. And we talked about my paranoia, fueled by, fueled by horror films. So, I'm hearing, you know, was it keep to the road, stay off the moors? I'm hearing dueling banjos. I'm expecting a flipping wicker man to appear over the top of the hill. And I think the point of the story is only fly fishing can do that to me. There's no way on earth, a van rocks up. Oh, hello, do you want to come for a ride in my van? No, fuck off. But someone's saying, oh, do you want to come and fish my remote lake up into the hills? Yeah, sure. With someone I've known for like 2 minutes, or to share a boat with a dog, and I don't like dogs, but because it was fishing, I just went along and did it. And I think it's what I found in Jura, up in the Cambrian Mountains. It's that brotherhood of the angle, man. Just meeting great people who are gonna help you, put you on fish, share their flies, share their tactics, and also spread the word about lakes. So it's Kerry, isn't it? Every time I look at it, I always go Seri. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm doing it phonetically because I'm an idiot. And that book, it looks absolutely brilliant. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy. And there's also the website Fishing in Wales as well, which is a great resource for information on fishing. But yeah, man, that brotherhood of that angle, the ultimate Masonic handshake, where you can just meet someone and yeah, if they got a rod, they're going to be a good guy.
Nice. Tell me something before we move on. We're going to talk a little bit more about the book because you've been alluding to it. But tell me something. If you were up there with your daughter Ella and you were wandering around, she'd come fishing, would your natural fear be replaced because you had her with you? Or do you think that would be manifest itself in a different way? Or do you think, right, I'm being dad, I've got to look after my daughter, so I can't afford to be afraid of the wicker man or anything else that comes with it?
Blimey, dude, that's like a deep question for 11:15 on a Sunday morning. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I think when I write as well, I'm an internal writer. It's my internal monologue. It's what's going on in my brain, and that's the filter as to how I view the world. With Ella, it's totally different. It's real world situations. So I'm not a helicopter parent. You know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s where things were very different. So I think it would be the realistic things. It would be making sure she's kept out of the sun. Making sure she's hydrated and food and she's having fun. Yeah, I think sort of I wouldn't expect werewolves and vampires to kidnap us and kind of run off with us. I think in that situation it'd be more kind of real world stuff. But yeah, it's funny because I mean my experience, my traumatic childhood experience with a werewolf. I was 6 years old, and that was something that's broadcast on a national channel at 6 o'clock in the evening. I look at Ella and how kind of sanitized and how careful everything is now. She's pretty much avoided horror. I did get to sit down and watch Jaws the other day, and man, I know I shouldn't have done it, but the bit when Hooper snorkel, you know what I'm talking about, snorkels down to the boat and the head pops up. I know it's coming. I know I should have warned Ella, but I'm sitting there just waiting for it, and she jumped through the roof. You know what I mean? But she thought it's a great film, and she's just started watching Stranger Things. So it's good, and she, in terms of her reading, she's been gravitating towards kind of spooky children's stories as well. So I think it's that good thing. It's the vicarious thrill, isn't it? It's why we watch films. It's why we read these books. So I'm really glad that she's climbing on that wide. And I sort of joke about the traumatic childhood incident with the werewolf, but man, it was proper traumatic. You know what I mean? It did genuinely trigger a fear of the dark, and anything hairy. From Planet of the Apes to Dave Lee Travis. If I saw that on the TV, it would freak me. It would freak me. It would freak me right out. And don't get me started about Rolf Harris. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on because there's lots I could go down with this as well. But let's move on to your book, which lets know a little bit about Fish Camp Fail. If you read Fly Culture, you'd certainly get a very good feel of Ben's writing, and I always describe you as an incredibly contemporary writer, like James Gilbraith, who writes for us. Chad Van Zanten, Russ Beck, we've got something. And also, we've got many others as well. But it's really, you take the subject and look at it from a completely different angle, which I love and thrilled to publish as well. And, you talked about the saltwater piece, and we published that with your Day with Manu, and which was really, really cool. How would you describe the premise? I guess we've talked about the premise of the book, but how would you describe your style best to somebody who's not read your writing before?
I think for me the difference is, we talked earlier about me being an internal writer, so I kind of live in my own head. So when I go off into the mountains, or I, sort of go fishing at the Barrows, that's kind of where I am. So I'm not going there. I'm not going to write about the flowers or the fauna, or kind of, describe a rainbow kind of glistening, in the morning sun. There's people that do that and do it beautifully, do it really, really well. But that's just not my thing, or how I kind of view the world. So I think every time I'll go fish. I could go fishing 5 or 6 times and nothing happens. There's no kind of trigger for me. And then either I'm going somewhere significant, so I kind of think, yeah, I could get a story out of this, or just something happens, and that's my kind of trigger, to write a piece. It's hard to describe, but I think, and also when I go fishing, what mood am I in? Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I stressed? What's going on? What's going on in the world? What's politically, socially, what's happening in the world. What books am I reading? Because that's going to have an influence on the article. What films am I watching? What series on Netflix am I watching? All this sort of feeds into what I'm trying to achieve, with my writing. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think a piece I wrote for Fly Fishing, which was secluded. So I think, a lot of angling writing is, I went somewhere and caught a fish. So the base of secluded was, I caught an 8-pound brown trout from the Barrows. I mean, that's a legendary fish. That's, the brownies are stocked as fingerlings. So that's a proper grown on ancient fish. But for me, that wasn't a story. That I went to the Barrows and caught a big fish. For me, the interesting thing was, that once you caught the fish, you take the photo goes on social media, and it was the reaction to the photo. And once the photo is published, the photo becomes the story, not the act of catching the fish. So I found that really, really interesting. And then because I'm a fan of the Kennedy assassination, the Zapruder footage, which is the cine camera film that he caught of the assassination, because that was so visceral. When the Warren Commission was formed, basically the Zapruder footage became the defining image of the assassination, and it defined the narrative. So basically, because the film was, I don't know, it's 12 seconds long, um, it had to be that Lee Harvey Oswald got all those shots off within 12 seconds, which is impossible. And that led to all the conspiracy theories. But what the Warren Commission overlooked was the Zapruder footage didn't capture the whole assassination, it captured the assassination in progress. So, in terms of the shots that Lee Harvey Oswald got off, they didn't have to fit within that film. But again, the film became the defining image. And in a weird way, that's what happened to me at the Barrows. The photo became the narrative of me catching a fish, and that was just a tangent I went off on. So I, it's just how I'm wired, man. You know what I mean? It's how I kind of view things. You know, when we went fishing at Mystery Gentleman's fishing Lake X, if I'd have been writing a piece about that, the most interesting, it wasn't like, oh, me and my great mate Pete going fishing and, we caught some fish. I sold it to you as this oasis of calm and peace and tranquility nestled in a beautiful valley, crystal clear water. And we rock up there, and there's basically a work gang of 12 arseholes in high vis vests with, with mowers and freaking chainsaws. So again, that would have been the narrative for that particular story. So I can't describe it, dude. It's just how I'm wired. I just have this weird way of kind of looking at stuff. Barrows 101 was the number one that was published in Fly Culture. It was in the early days of the pandemic. And again, that just sort of fell into my lap. I hadn't fished the Barrows probably for about 5 years for kind of various reasons. I fished an evening session. So I'd forgotten all the golden rules. And so, sort of fished there, and I thought, yeah, that was kind of quite interesting. And I think just the environment, the fact that because everywhere was shut down, all the kids were going and partying at the Barrows. So, the car park is full of NOS cylinders. There's beer cans everywhere. Instead of EasyJet planes flying in, you've got military cargo planes flying in, the buses going past. Everyone's got face masks in. So there was this real kind of J.G. Ballard dystopian feel to it. He wrote a book called Concrete Island, where basically a guy, over a series of flyovers I think the old A1 in London, he crashes and he's marooned on this concrete island between flyovers. And because the Barrows is these concrete banks, just getting this weird kind of Ballard-esque dystopian vibes. But this is it, because I had this kind of life before fishing and outside interests beyond fishing, and just all this kind of feeds into my writing. So it's kind of hard to explain. It's just whenever I approach a piece of writing or a particular fishing trip, I'm just looking at it through this weird filter, and just looking for something that's unusual, sort of piques my interest, and really kind of go from there.
Nice. We published the Zapruder piece. I can't remember when it was, which was a wonderful piece of writing. And while you were talking there, it made me think about how you go about your articles. And it seems to me that you have two subjects. You have the fishing subject, but then you use another subject to draw it all together. So in that case, in your first piece, it was about a zombie apocalypse and how you could go fishing during that zombie apocalypse because there was a fence that held the zombies at bay. The Kennedy assassination, again, was tied in with where you were fishing, all those sorts of things. And it strikes me that there is, even the first piece that I published of yours talked about the invincibility of Arsenal in the, whenever it was, the 80s or early 90s, of them as a football club, yet tied fishing. So it looks as though, to me, that you almost go outside of the realm of fishing to bring it back into fishing. Do you think that's something that may cross your mind when you're writing these?
It's almost subconscious. if you want to give a fancy name to it, I call it narrative framing. So with the Barrows 101, it was a good story. I had the thing that I hadn't fished the Barrows for years. It was an interesting trip. It also coincided with me going to the testing centre up at Bristol Airport, and it was a good piece. But at the same time, I was reading a book called Broken by a crime writer called Don Winslow. I can't recommend him highly enough. He's going to go through the stratosphere soon, because I think a lot of his books are being optioned by TV companies. So there's going to be films, there's going to be box sets based on his work. And he did a story, what's it called? I think it's called Crime 101. So he's a big fan of those sort of classic Steve McQueen movies, Bullet, things like that, and heist movies. So his story was about a jewel thief who drives up and down this highway on the kind of California coast doing these jobs. And as soon as I read that book, I suddenly thought, yes, that's the narrative frame I needed for my story. And it's interesting that you talked about the Invincibles, because this is going back to me being an idiot again, and like having no life plan and just bimbling along. My background is in screenwriting and video games writing, and basically, I'd given up writing. Screenwriting. It's like one of those, someone trying to be a pro footballer. You just have to reach a point where you just think it's not going to happen. So I'd been screenwriting. I just absolutely hacked off with it. Video games was good, but I was a freelance and became a dad. So I had to be responsible for the first time in my life and get a proper job. So I completely binned writing. I wasn't creating anything. But obviously, from my life, I'd always wanted to be a writer. I'd always loved writing, and I always loved fishing. But this is what an idiot I am. I never occurred to me to put the two together. I've been keeping a fishing journal, since the first time I fished the Barrows. That's been going for about 16 years now. But it was more, weather, tactics, what happened. It wasn't really kind of any creative piece. It was like a diary. Um, but a number of factors came together. I'd been aware of, your excellent Eat, Sleep, Fish. So I kind of knew that there was, an avenue for new writing. So that was interesting. And with the Invincibles, I was fishing a place called Mallard Lake, which is up near Malmesbury. And it was just this period over the course of probably 2 months, over 5-6 different trips. I hooked, this is no word of a lie, I hooked and dropped 8 fish in a row. I thought I'd been cursed by God. I felt like Jonah, I didn't know what was going on. Some of it was bad luck. Some of it was just utter stupidity. And, some of them were just like, genuine WTF moments. But it was such an extraordinary thing. I thought, oh yeah, perhaps I should write about this. But for me, we talked about narrative framing. For me, the light bulb moment was that my fury at it, my disbelief that this could happen to me. Yeah, I rationalized that statistically unlikely things still occur. People win people win the lottery. People get eaten by great white sharks. And Arsenal went unbeaten for a whole season. And this light bulb just went off in my head. So I had the fishing side, which was kind of interesting. This unlikely run of bad luck where I had hooked and dropped 8 fish. And the narrative framing was against the backdrop of the Invincibles. And, that arc was born. I sent it to you, mate. You were lovely enough to publish it straight away. And I kind of went from there. And it was really a marked contrast to what happened to me, with screenwriting. I was a good writer, always had an agent, everything I wrote got optioned. But that lucky break, or just never, I was convinced it was going to happen, but it just never happened. And I tried writing for, getting involved in TV, which I really didn't want to do. I wanted to write movies. And I just continuously felt like a square peg in a round hole. Didn't really sort of fit in the industry. Kept on getting pushed to write for the for the soap operas. Nothing against that. People who write for soap operas, brilliant writers, absolute geniuses to be able to do that. Just not my thing. I tried out for Hollyoaks. I tried out for EastEnders. I got on the BBC Writers Academy thing, but just didn't happen. Yeah, with my fishing writing, just straight away wrote something and it was published. Bang. You launched Fly Culture, wrote something, bang, it was published. So immediately I found an outlet, for my desire to kind of write. And just gone from there, dude. And the natural progression from that was to ultimately produce a book.
Which is fantastic and brings us nicely on, because we've talked, again, I've said previously that if you have read Fly Culture, you'll know Ben Jailer's writing, but you may not have. But you may be listening to the podcast. And social media is a wonderful thing about telling people about something. But I don't think there's anything better to get a sense of what a writer is about, other than to get them to actually read an extract. So I thought this would be a really good way of Ben letting you get a look inside the work that he's done to put this book together. So he's going to read now a very, very short extract from one of the chapters, just to give you an idea. So Ben, it's all yours. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to be reading.
Okay. First of all, give a shout out to Chad Van Santen for this. He was very kind enough to look at an early draft of this story when I was pitching it to some American magazines, and gave it a thorough edit and made some great suggestions. So shout out to Chad, top man. The story is called Ginny versus the Four French Bulldogs of the Apocalypse, and it's the story that was set on Jura that we discussed earlier. So just to read from that. I didn't know that ferry staff collected empty coffee cups, or were polite, or even smiled. Years of travelling on Brittany ferries, crewed by surly French teens, have seriously lowered my expectations of maritime customer service. But the Finlagen is different. It also has a priority seating area for dogs and their owners. I hadn't realised this when I sat down. All I saw was the most amazing amount of leg room I've ever seen in my entire life. The men's tennis semi of the Queen's Club Championship is on TV. Both players are receiving treatment between games. It's less about who's going to win and more about which one is going to quit first. I didn't get much sleep in the B&B in Moffat last night. It sounded like the person in the room above mine was coughing up a lung. I've necked an espresso, hoping the caffeine will keep me awake, but all it does is set my already frayed nerves even more on edge. The alarm on a camper van blares every 30 seconds on repeat. I'm twitchier than Steve Smith at the crease, and my need to disconnect from the wider world is more urgent than ever. One of a pair of border terriers climbs down off the seat in front of me and begins attacking the laces on my Vans. A neurotic spaniel belonging to a young couple whines and shakes when the girl goes to the restaurant at the bow of the ship. A Cheshire housewife parades up and down the deck with 4 French bulldogs, wearing what looks like matching black leather S&M gear. A white hound the size of Tyson Fury sleeps on the deck with one eye open, waiting for one of the bulldogs to come within its range. The air is filled with yips, barks, growls, and whimpers. There are too many dogs in too small a space, and there's that feeling of impending violence you get in a kebab shop at 2 a.m. on a Friday night. I'll soon be on a remote Scottish island with fewer people on it than there are dog owners on this ferry, and I cannot fucking wait.
Excellent. Excellent. Very, very good. And like we say, this is giving us a nice little insight into Ben's style of writing. And it is, and I like it, and I've been proud and pleased to publish it because it is a little bit different. And that will hopefully, we might have some more in a second as well. But what I wanted to do, Ben, was get a sense of when this book became live, what did it feel like to put it out there? And when it was, were you nervous about it? How did you? What were your emotions when? Because I know what I feel when the magazine goes out. So that's 4 times a year. I don't sleep. I worry. I think, is it going to get to people safely? Given that the postal service isn't what it used to be, and I understand the reasons why. Are they going to love it as much as I have? All those sorts of things. Were you going through a similar sort of process when the book became available and people were able to buy it and read it?
I think in some ways it's a kind of arrogant thing, isn't it? To really believe that something you've produced will be able to find an audience, and that your voice is deserving to be heard. I don't know if you feel like this with the magazine piece. So I think that was the kind of first hurdle I had to overcome. And I just kind of I had this, the bulk of the book is this new kind of these long form chapters. I just kind of reread some of the stuff I'd had previously published, and I thought, yeah, this is all right. I think, I'd like to put a book together about this. Again, James Gilbraith was fantastic with his sage advice and wisdom, as to how to go ahead. Steve Murgatroyd again was really, really good. So once I kind of got over that, I don't know, not shyness, but just that thing of standing up and sort of putting this out there, that was okay. It's been an intense process. Writing it and putting it together was the least part. Designing the cover, typesetting, sort of going through Amazon as well. That's an interesting thing. But dude, in terms of pressure, everything just kicked off at once. So as well as publishing a book, um, at work we've pissed off the unions. So I've had unions up my arse for the last 2 months. I've had COVID. Fortunately, not too bad. I was lucky. It's several variants down the lines. I'm the beneficiary of sort of 3 vaccination shots, but everything happened at once. So, but it's an ongoing process. I think there was a brief thing that first time that I got an author's proof through and opened it and took it out of the package. That was a really, really good feeling. And I wanted to produce, because I think in my day job, I work in PR and marketing, so I'm used to producing, sort of printed material. So I wanted this to be as high quality as it could. So, the genius John Ogborn, who is fly culture designer, he was good enough to produce a cover for me, which, I was really thrilled with. We had a couple of options, but I think I sided with that one. Eventually, a gentleman called Andy Degg from Green Hat Design. He designed the interior of the book. Americans refer to them as interior designers, which he wasn't happy about because it makes him sound like some, South Kensington housewife who, like sort of bungs some sofas in a front room and things. She's interior designer. I used to work with people like that, by the way, so I'm not being completely kind of facetious. So he typesettled the book. And a wonderful photographer called Babs Every Pidu, who took some author pics, actually made me look quite pretty, which was which was good. And everyone likes to feel special for a day, so that was that was very nice. But in terms of so I had that brief kind of moment of I've done a book, and then it's just like, right, I've got to get it out there, because it's not going to sell itself. So you have to work. Now the hard work is really starting. But it's had some cracking reviews so far. Great feedback from people that have read it. I've got some reviews on Amazon. The only appeal I'd say is, if you have bought it and you have read it, if you can find the time just to leave a quick review up on Amazon, even if it's a couple of lines, because leaving a review on Amazon will guarantee protection from werewolves and the undead for the next 12 months. That's the fish camp fail cast iron guarantee. So it's been really exciting. It's been mad. Scary at times, because we talked about that arrogance of actually thinking that you've got, that me, Ben Jailer, has got something to say that the outside world might be interested in. And I think once you overcome that, but equally convincing people to, particularly in these economic times, to part with their hard-earned cash. But I've had people from non-fishing people buy it as well, and I think because how we taught my writing process, you might have to work a bit of the way into the story before you actually get into any kind of fishing action. It's not how to catch fish kind of book. And I think the refreshing thing is that a lot of people who aren't into fishing have read it, and because there's all these sort of wider cultural kind of nods and aspects to it, they're kind of really digging it as well. So it's good, and I think the plan is, fingers crossed, God willing, we all still healthy, is maybe aim to get one out every 2 years. But I think rather than a collection of stories for the next one, even though there is that kind of narrative thread that links to stories and that journey, through the pandemic as well, which is still ongoing. Um, Maybe find a single kind of narrative and maybe write a more kind of traditional narrative based book. So I'm disappearing off on a mission or something and trying to achieve something. I think that'd be an interesting thing to tackle.
Nice. It's interesting you use the word arrogance a couple of times, and A, I don't think you're arrogant. B, I don't think I'm arrogant. I think what it is almost a confidence in some respects, and I don't mean overconfidence or anything else, but perhaps having been published in a number of places, that gives you the confidence to say, actually, I might be able to do this. And I think that's where your process has come from. And I'm lucky that I can be confident publishing stuff I think people will like, because I think they're really good writers. And I think our readers will like it. So I think possibly a very slight disservice to yourself there, because I would never use you and the word arrogant in the same sentence or think about those. I do wonder if it is just confidence in what you're doing. And the term I always use is back yourself, and backing yourself or putting your balls on the line. And that's to me clearly what you've done.
Thanks, dude. Yeah, I much prefer that. Yeah, it's that. I think I call it the inner chimp. It's just that little negative voice in your head when I think, Christ, dude, you launched a fishing magazine, Billy Big Balls. You know what I mean? But it's that inner chimp that kind of is always kind of like niggling in the back of your mind. So I think once you stepped over that line, yeah, you're okay, because you know what you've done with Fly Culture is amazing. The product you've launched, giving new writers like me, an opportunity. I'm really, really grateful for that, dude. It's awesome.
No, you don't. I do it because you're good, but this is turning you too much of a love-in. So let's let's move on. Give us another section. Tell us what you're going to read us a short section of.
Okay, this one is called Q O Fortuna. Apologies to any classical music buffs out there, but for me, I'm familiar with this song through two things. The first thing is the Old Spice advert from the 70s, and the second one is from John Borman's masterpiece Excalibur. Um, it's one of my favourite moments in film. There's a moment where Percival returns with the Holy Grail to Arthur, who's dying, and he revives him by making him drink from the cup. And basically, the revelation is the land and the king are one. And Arthur and his knights, they get on their horses and they ride through the land. And as they ride through the land, you see the land coming back to life, barren trees, sprouting leaves, uh, apple trees blossoming. It's beautiful. And cute oval toilet is blasting out, man. It's just one of my favorite cinematic moments. But what this story is about, it was actually about my own quest. Um, we're up in Teefy Pools, me and Steve M, and we bumped into a couple of big Welsh lads sitting together on a quad bike, which was kind of quite a funny sight. And basically, we were fishing Lyn Egnan, and probably beyond the dam, there's this like sort of 700 foot ridge, and they reckon that beyond that was this mythical lake filled with trout. And basically, they walked up there. They went there a couple of years ago and walked up there, and they said it nearly freaking killed them. So this time they bought a quad bike, especially to get up to this mountain. And it was a piece of crap. So you got these two, I'm doing them a disservice. They were freaking huge, man, and sitting far closer than two white, middle-aged, heterosexual Welshmen in Sims waders should ever be. And they disappear off around Lyn Egnan on this, quad bike, this farting like a 19th century consumptive chimney sweep orphan, you know what I mean? And we're thinking they're never going to make it. But of course, nothing piques a fisherman's interest than a secret lake. So this piece really deals with my kind of Arthurian quest to find this mythical lake. And the link for me with Q.O. Fortuna, I haven't got digital radio in my car, so I'm still relying on, one of the kind of first generation iPods. And so I'd had this crazy adventure. Um, and I was coming down the mountains from Linnegnan, and it's a plateau, and before you is like probably 40 miles of beautiful Welsh countryside, hills and vales, and beyond the sea, the sun shining, and my iPod served up Q O Fortuna, and it was just it was just heaven. So anyway, this little bit covers what we discussed before, where my experience in the bothy. So here we go, Q O Fortuna. I thought bothies were tiny mountainside shelters consisting of loose stone walls and corrugated roofs. What awaits me is a two-story slate grey farmhouse, complete with an outside bog and a stream running out the front. Standing outside, trying to get a fire going in a metal pot, are Lancashire's answer to Jesse and Chester. Jesse is bearded with a gamer's pallor and a physique to match. He's wearing knee-length board shorts, a black baggy t-shirt, and ankle socks with no shoes. Chester is wearing a V-neck jumper with a pair of joggers. His head is shaved, and the closeness of his eyes, along with his height, would have earned him the nickname Lofty in a 70s sitcom. It takes them more than an hour to get the fire going and the water boiled, which they promptly spill before they can get it into their mugs. They then nearly give us all carbon monoxide poisoning while transferring the burning embers from the pot into the bothy stove, filling the ground floor with acrid black smoke. God only knows what they think of a southern fly fishing ponds like me, probably a cross between J.R. Hartley and Uncle Monty, armed with a stash of Rohypnol for an act of midnight burglary, as irrelevant to them as a Betamax video. It turns out that Jesse and Chester are refugees from their local lockdown. They've driven down in a car that has only 3 gears, none of which are reverse. To make the car go backwards, they have to engage in a Fred Flintstone-type maneuver by opening the driver's door, putting a foot on the floor, and pushing backwards. Jesse works at an IT call centre. He's recently returned from Spain, where he spent the entire lockdown confined to his flat. It's clear that being locked down in a former fascist state, with police drones flying overhead and SWAT teams descending on you the second you set foot outside the front door, was no picnic. Every time I ask a question about the lockdown in Spain, he develops a 1,000-yard stare and facial tic, saying, "I don't want to talk about it." I never do establish exactly what it is that Chester does, but he was furloughed during the lockdown and then suspended in his first week back for refusing to wear a face mask. There's that awkward moment where I have to admit that I work in the care sector, but neither of them asks me if I know anyone firsthand that has died of COVID-19 or starts quoting anti-vaxxer conspiracy theories. Luckily, we share a love of the outdoors and alcohol. Plus, we only have to put up with one another until bedtime, which I've already decided will be 9 p.m. As our ancestors learned, there's not a lot to do after dark with no electricity, and I'm all out of Rohypnol.
Very good, buddy. Very, very good. And hopefully this has given listeners a little bit of a look inside Fish Camp Fail. It's humorous. It's well observed. Very, very well written as well. So, Ben, that's been great to listen to those two pieces that have had me laughing away in the background as well, as your work always does as well. It is interesting, isn't it, about, getting the book out there and letting people know about it. And I hope, like I say, that I genuinely hope that people have got a proper sense of what the book is about. And as I said, I'm sure many will know about Ben's work already. And I'm going to do a shout out for creatives as well. And, if you are working hard like Ben has done and many other people has done, and you're submitting articles, make sure if the publication that you're in is charging money, make sure you get paid as well. We got some help to get going very early on, but as soon as I could, I paid and I kept upping it. It's only the paper costs that have put paid to that, because I'd have upped more what I was paying. It's the creatives that help make fly culture what it is, and so I feel that they should be paid for it. And I hope people will consider supporting Ben's work as well, which is available on Amazon. Ben, how can people find Fish Camp Fail if they would like to, having listened to you?
They can go to Amazon and either type my name, Ben Jailer, or type Fish Camp Fail, and the book will come up. It's available in paperback plus as an ebook. I'm still getting used to this whole author thing, but a few people have asked me for to sign their book or sign a copy, which I keep on telling them will immediately devalue the book, and also means that they can't get a refund. But also, if you do want to, for some any like mad kind of perverted reason, if you do want a signed copy, I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Insta. I'm on Twitter. Just drop me a message, and I'll be happy to I don't know, write something rude in there, draw a cock and balls, and get that off to you. So yeah, give me a shout. Hit me up.
Fantastic. And Ben's surname Jailer is Jailler. So that's how you'll find him as well. Ben, it's been brilliant as always to catch up. I know we speak a lot, but it's been lovely to be able to tell people about what you're doing and why I think it is really, really good. So thank you on this very hot Sunday morning to take the time to talk with me. I've really, as always, enjoyed it.
Cheers, dude. It's been awesome. Always good to catch up. Can I do the QM a bit? When you do the outro, you'll have to edit it. No, you have to do the outro, and then I go QM.
Of course I will. Well, this, everyone, has been the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. As ever, there will be another one out next week. And as ever, we try and vary the content for you. It's lovely to talk about fishing, but I'll try and find a little bit about the person, about their story, and of course tie that together with fishing. So I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as the next. Over to you, Ben.
You, Emma.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.